7 days without food. 7 days drinking only contaminated water. 7 days waiting for death to arrive. But what happened inside that Auschwitz prison cell wasn't what the Nazis expected. It wasn't what anyone expected. Because sometimes, when we lose absolutely everything, that's precisely when we find something we never knew existed. Maximilian Kolbe was dying, but something was being born within him. Something that made even the SS guards recoil from what they saw. Have you ever truly known hunger? I'm not talking about skipping breakfast or dieting. I'm talking about feeling your stomach contracting like a vice, feeling your body beginning to consume itself. Now imagine that in an underground cell. No light, no fresh air, surrounded by the stench of death. And yet, he sang. The other prisoners heard voices coming from the death cellar, prayers, hymns, as if down there wasn't a place of execution but a chapel. The guards descended expecting to find broken men, begging for mercy. Instead, they found something they couldn't explain, something that haunted them more than any cry of despair. But let's go back to the beginning, because the real story didn't begin in that cellar. It began 47 years earlier, when a 10-year-old boy had a vision that would change everything. Raymond Kolbe was praying before an image of Our Lady when she appeared, not a hallucination, not a dream. She was there, holding 2 crowns. The air in the chapel felt different and thicker, as if all of reality had paused for this moment. The candlelight no longer flickered. The silence was so profound that Raymond could hear his own heartbeat, one white, one red. The crowns shone with a light that came from nowhere. The white was so pure it hurt to look at directly. The red pulsed like a heart, as if it were made of living blood, transformed into crystal. The white represented purity, the red, martyrdom. "Which do you choose?" she asked. The voice didn't come from outside. It came from within him, as if his own cells were asking the question, as if the entire universe were waiting for the answer from a 10-year-old boy. And the boy, without hesitation, said, "I choose both." At that moment, Maximilian Kolbe's destiny was sealed. But he didn't know that the true preparation for those 7 days had begun there, in that childhood prayer. He didn't know he was signing a contract with infinity, because there's a difference between accepting suffering and transcending it, between surviving pain and transforming it into something entirely different. Kolbe spent his entire life learning that difference. As a Franciscan priest, he preached about love. As a missionary, he traveled to Japan. As an editor, he published magazines that reached 1 million readers. But all of that was just training, preparation for the moment when he would discover what he was truly made of. September 1939. The Nazis invaded Poland. Kolbe could have fled. His superiors offered it. His friends pleaded. Instead, he stayed. He transformed his monastery into a refuge for Jewish refugees. And it wasn't just a refuge, it was a complex rescue operation. For months, Kolbe and his friars created false documents, hid entire families in the monastery's outbuildings, organized escape routes through the forest. One night, as Nazi patrols approached, Kolbe hid 17 Jewish children in the chapel's altar. For 3 hours, while the soldiers searched every room, those children remained in absolute silence. Later, Kolbe said he had never felt God's presence so intensely as in those moments of terror. Can you imagine the courage that required? Not the courage of a single moment, but the courage of every day, of every decision, of looking at absolute evil and choosing absolute love. He knew he was signing his own death warrant. Each family he saved was more evidence that would one day be used against him. February 1941. The Gestapo came to his door. When they arrested him, Kolbe was praying. When they interrogated him, he remained silent. When they tortured him, he didn't denounce anyone, but that was still nothing compared to what was to come. Auschwitz, the place where humanity was pushed to its limit, where men were reduced to numbers, where hope went to die. Prisoner, 19670. That was now Maximilian Kolbe's name. But something strange was happening around him. Even there, in the heart of the Nazi death machine, there was something different about this man's presence. Other prisoners sought him out, whispered confessions, asked for blessings, as if in the midst of hell he carried a piece of heaven. Jerzy, a young professor from Warsaw, later described, "When you spoke with Kolbe, it was as if the concentration camp disappeared for a few moments. You forgot where you were. You felt like you were talking to someone who knew secrets about how to survive, not just physically, but spiritually." Marian, a carpenter from Krakow, recounted, "He had a way of looking at you that made you remember who you were before all this, before the uniforms, before the numbers, before the fear. And it wasn't just words. Kolbe shared his ration when someone was weaker. He cared for the sick. He cleaned others' wounds with his own hands, as if the suffering of others was more important than his own." The guards noticed. How could they not? In a place designed to break the human spirit, this man radiated something they couldn't break, something that bothered them more than any physical rebellion. And then came the day that changed everything. July 1941. A prisoner escaped. The Nazi rules were clear. For every fugitive, 10 men would die of starvation. The commander chose 10 at random. Among them, Franciszek Gajowniczek, a young father. "My wife! My children!" he cried when he understood his fate. And it was at that moment that Maximilian Kolbe stepped forward. But it wasn't an impulsive movement. Witnesses later described how he paused for a moment, closed his eyes, and his lips moved in silent prayer, as if he were asking for confirmation, as if he were checking if this was truly his mission. When he opened his eyes, there was absolute certainty on his face. Not the resignation of someone surrendering to fate, but the determination of someone choosing their destiny. "I would like to die in this man's place." The silence that followed was absolute. In Auschwitz, no one volunteered to die. No one offered their life for a stranger. The basic rule of survival was to look out for yourself, only yourself. But Father Kolbe shattered that rule in the most radical way imaginable, and in doing so, he broke something far deeper. He broke the logic of hate. He shattered the system that dictated some humans were worth more than others. The bewildered commander asked, "Who are you?" "I am a Catholic priest." And so began the 7 most extraordinary days in modern history, because what transpired in that cellar wasn't merely a slow death. It was a transformation that defied everything we know about human suffering. They descended into the death cell on July 31st. 10 men condemned to die of hunger and thirst. But from the first day, something was different. Instead of despair, there was singing. Instead of fighting over phantom scraps, there were prayers. Instead of curses against God, there was gratitude. And at the center of it all was Father Kolbe, not as a leader, but as something more, as if he were a bridge between that place of death and something infinitely greater. The SS guards who descended to check on the bodies expected to find men driven mad by hunger. Instead, they found serene faces, gentle voices, as if these men knew something they didn't. Franciszek Gajowniczek, the man Father Kolbe saved, later described it. It was as if they were on a spiritual retreat, not in a death chamber. But how is that possible? How does someone transform the act of starving to death into something sacred? The answer lies in what Father Kolbe discovered during those 7 days. Something that changed not only his own experience of death, but the experience of everyone around him, because there's a secret about fasting that most people don't know. A secret Father Kolbe had learned through years of spiritual discipline, but one that was truly tested in those final 7 days. When you stop feeding your body, something happens in your brain, in your spirit. The boundaries between the physical and the spiritual begin to dissolve. Father Kolbe wasn't just starving. He was entering a state of consciousness that most of us never experience, a place where physical pain transforms into spiritual clarity, and it was in this state that he made his final request. But to understand that request, you need to grasp what was happening inside Father Kolbe's mind during those days. Because it wasn't just hunger, it was a journey inward, a descent into the core of what it means to be human. Day 1, the thirst. Not just physical thirst, but a thirst for meaning, for purpose, for connection with something larger than mere survival. Day 2, a hunger that goes beyond the stomach, the hunger of the soul, the body beginning to feed on itself, but the spirit finding sustenance in something invisible. Day 3, the clarity, the moment when the famished mind stops worrying about tomorrow and becomes wholly present, wholly alive. And Father Kolbe guided the other men through this journey, like a shaman conducting a sacred ceremony, like a captain navigating through a storm. He taught them to transform hunger into prayer, thirst into contemplation, the fear of death into acceptance of eternal life. But these weren't just pretty words. Father Kolbe did something no leadership manual teaches. He shared his own strength. When one man panicked, Father Kolbe held his hand and whispered stories of his childhood in Poland. When another began to delirious from thirst, Father Kolbe sang lullabies his mother had sung to him. And most remarkably, when Father Kolbe's own lips were cracked from dehydration, he used the little saliva he had left to moisten the lips of the others, as if his own life were less important than the comfort of those men. That's how 9 strangers became a family. That's how a death chamber transformed into a sanctuary. Day 4, the guards began to whisper among themselves. Something was happening in that cell they didn't understand, not just resistance, but transformation. Heinrich, an SS guard who had executed hundreds of prisoners without batting an eye, descended to check the bodies. He expected to find broken men, crawling, begging for food. Instead, he found something that haunted him for the rest of his life. 10 men sitting in a circle, some visibly near death, but all with an expression of peace, as if they were participating in a spiritual gathering, not agonizing in a death chamber. And in the center, Father Kolbe, speaking softly, but with a voice that carried an authority that didn't come from military rank or physical strength. It came from something far deeper. He looked at me. Heinrich confessed years later at his war crimes trial. And in that look, there was no hatred. There was forgiveness, as if he knew all my sins and yet forgave me. It was the most terrifying moment of my life. Day 5, other prisoners could hear the singing coming from the cellar. In a place where even whispering was dangerous, these men sang, as if the proximity of death had unleashed something in their voices. The melodies floated through the concrete walls, Polish lullabies, Latin hymns, even German folk songs that Stefan had learned before the war. As if, in the presence of death, all national boundaries had dissolved. Bruno, a prisoner in the adjacent cell, whispered to the others, "They've found a way to turn hell into heaven." Day 6, 3 of the 10 men had already died, but not in despair, in peace, as if Father Kolbe had found a way to make even death a sacred experience. And as each one died, Father Kolbe did something extraordinary. He closed their eyes, kissed their foreheads, and whispered something in each one's ear. Words only the dying heard, but words that transformed their final moments into something that felt more like birth than death. And then came the 7th day. Father Kolbe was still alive, still unconscious, still praying. And it was at that moment that he made his final request to God, a request that would reveal the true secret behind his transformation, the secret that had turned an execution into an ascension. But this request wasn't what you'd expect from a dying man. It wasn't for salvation. It wasn't to escape suffering. It was something far deeper, something that would show that Father Kolbe had discovered a kind of power that not even the Nazis could touch. Because during those 7 days, he had learned something that would forever change our understanding of what's possible when we lose absolutely everything, but hold on to what truly matters. What did he ask for? And how did this request manage to transform not only his own death, but the lives of thousands who came after him? The answer will change everything you think about suffering, about faith, and about the hidden power that exists within each of us when we are pushed to our absolute limit. Pause for a moment, take a deep breath, because what I'm about to reveal to you goes against everything you've learned about confronting suffering. Maximilian Kolbe's last request wasn't to escape pain, it was to intensify it. Lord, may I love as you love. That was his plea. At a moment when most people would be begging for relief, he asked for a greater capacity to love, as if he'd discovered that love isn't the opposite of suffering, but its deepest transformation. But let's pause here, because this request didn't come out of nowhere. During those 7 days, something had expanded within Kolbe's chest, as if each hour of fasting had removed a layer of fear, a barrier of ego, a wall of self-protection. On the first day, he loved only the 9 men beside him. On the third day, his heart had expanded to include the guards who held them prisoner. On the 5th day, he felt compassion even for the commander who had ordered his death. And on the 7th day, when he made his last request, Kolbe had become something that transcended normal human categories. He loved his executioners as much as he loved his victims. He loved the system that was killing him as much as he loved those he was trying to save. It wasn't masochism, it was something infinitely more powerful. It was the discovery that love has no limits when you stop trying to protect it. And it was at that precise moment that something extraordinary happened. The guards who went down to check the bodies on that 7th day found Kolbe still alive, still conscious, still radiating a peace they couldn't comprehend. But there was something more, something that made even hardened Nazi soldiers hesitate before what they saw. Kolbe wasn't just surviving, he was shining, not literally. But there was a presence around him that transformed that death cell into something sacred, as if 7 days of fasting had burned away everything superficial and left only the pure essence of who he truly was. When the commander decided it was time to accelerate the process, he ordered a prisoner doctor to administer the lethal injection. The doctor, a German named Dr. Bock, descended the stairs trembling, not from cold, but from something he couldn't explain. The camp doctor, a German prisoner, was summoned to administer the lethal injection. When he entered the cell, he stopped. Later, he described, "It was impossible not to feel that you were in the presence of something holy." Dr. Bock prepared the syringe with carbolic acid. His hands trembled. In 3 years in the concentration camp, he had administered hundreds of these injections. He had never hesitated. But something about this man was different. Kolbe extended his arm willingly. There was no fear, no resistance, only an acceptance so profound that it transformed even the act of receiving poison into something that resembled communion. "Forgive me," Dr. Bock whispered as the needle pierced Kolbe's skin. "I forgive you," Kolbe replied, and then, looking into the doctor's eyes, "And may God forgive us all." The injection was administered directly into the vein, a dose that would kill a healthy man in minutes. Kolbe closed his eyes, tilted his head back, and began to pray. His last words were a whispered prayer, not for himself, but for his executioners, as if, even at the final moment, his concern was for those who were causing his death. "Hail Mary, full of grace, protect these men, they know not what they do." And then, on August 14th, 1941, Maximilian Kolbe died. Dr. Bock later said he had never seen anyone die with such peace. It was as if he were falling asleep in the arms of someone he loved very much. But the story doesn't end there, because what he discovered during those 7 days didn't die with him. It spread like invisible waves, touching lives in ways he couldn't have imagined. Franciszek Gajowniczek, the man Kolbe saved, lived to be 95. He spent the rest of his life telling this story. speaking about the man who gave him not only more years of life, but a completely new understanding of what life can mean. He gave me my family back, Gajowniczek would say. But more than that, he showed me that there is something within us that not even death can touch. And the transformation didn't stop with him. His children grew up hearing this story, his grandchildren too. When Gajowniczek died in 1995, more than 1,000 people attended his funeral, not just to honor his life, but to honor the life of the man who had died in his place 54 years earlier. Other Auschwitz survivors reported something similar. They spoke of a priest who had transformed his own death into a lesson about life, who had shown that even in the darkest place on earth, the light can shine. Bruno, a young political prisoner who was in the cell next door, later described, "For 3 nights, I heard singing coming from that cellar. On the 4th day, I heard only silence, but it was a different silence. It wasn't the silence of defeat, it was the silence of victory, as if something sacred had happened down there." Dozens of former prisoners, when interviewed decades later, mentioned Kolbe. They spoke of how the courage of one man had planted seeds of hope that germinated long after the war had ended. But what was the real secret? What had Kolbe discovered during those 7 days that gave him this inexplicable power? The answer lies in what happens when we stop fighting against suffering and begin to dance with it. Think about it. All our lives, we are taught to avoid pain, to flee from discomfort, to always seek the easiest path. Kolbe did the opposite. He plunged into suffering head first, not as a masochist, but as an alchemist, someone who discovered how to transform lead into gold, pain into love, death into transcendence. And here's the secret that most people don't understand. The suffering we avoid makes us weak. The suffering we embrace makes us invincible. During those 7 days of fasting, he wasn't just dying. He was being born into something new. Each hour without food was an hour of discovery. Each moment of thirst was a moment of thirst for something greater. It was as if each layer of comfort removed revealed a deeper layer of strength. Each lost convenience uncovered a hidden capacity. Each surrendered security unlocked a power that had been dormant his entire life. And you know the most incredible part? That same power is available to you. I'm not suggesting you need to fast until death, but I am saying there's a force within you that only emerges when you stop running from difficult things. How many times have you avoided a tough conversation because you feared the discomfort? How many times have you failed to pursue a dream because the path seemed too arduous? How many times have you chosen safety over truth? Kolbe showed us that on the other side of our greatest fear lies our greatest strength. That when we stop shielding ourselves from everything, we discover we are far more resilient than we imagined. Think about the last time you faced something truly difficult, a loss, a betrayal, a failure. You probably thought you couldn't survive, that it was too much for you. But you survived, didn't you? And not just survived, you likely emerged stronger, wiser, more compassionate. That's the alchemy Kolbe discovered. The transformation that happens when we stop fighting against suffering and begin to dance with it, when we stop seeing pain as an enemy and start seeing it as a teacher. But there's another secret hidden in this story, a secret about fasting that goes beyond physical deprivation. When Kolbe stopped feeding himself physically, he began to feed himself spiritually. The hunger of the body awakened a hunger of the soul. And that hunger of the soul found sustenance that food could never provide. This isn't empty mysticism, it's neuroscience. When we fast, our brains produce ketones. These ketones not only fuel our bodies differently, but they alter our consciousness. They make us more alert, more present, more connected to realities we normally ignore. But something even deeper happens. After 72 hours without food, the brain enters a state called neuronal autophagy. It begins to cleanse damaged cells, remove accumulated toxins, optimize neural connections. It's as if physical hunger triggers a spiritual cleansing. Modern studies show that prolonged fasts can increase the production of BDNF, a protein that promotes the growth of new neurons. People report extraordinary mental clarity, intense spiritual connections, and a feeling of being beyond the physical body. Kolbe had discovered this through years of spiritual discipline. He fasted regularly as part of his religious practice. He knew how to navigate these altered states of consciousness. But it was in those final 7 days that he experienced it in its purest and most extreme form. And it was in this altered state of consciousness that he managed to see something that changed everything. He managed to see that death wasn't the end of the story, but merely a transition to a new chapter. That's why he wasn't afraid. That's why he could sing. That's why he radiated peace in a place designed to destroy all hope. He had seen the other side, and what he saw was so beautiful that it made even dying an experience of joy. But you don't have to wait until you're dying to access this power. You can start today, right now. Start small. The next time you feel hungry, pause before eating immediately. Observe the sensation. Don't run from it. Dance with it. Ask, what is my body really asking for? Is it food, or is it something deeper? The next time you face a difficult situation, don't immediately look for the easiest way out. Ask, what can I learn here? How can I grow through this? Kolbe didn't run when the Nazis came knocking. He saw an opportunity to serve, even when it meant losing everything. The next time someone needs help and it's inconvenient for you, remember Kolbe stepping forward when he could have remained silent. Remember that the most inconvenient moments are often the greatest opportunities to discover who we truly are. And here's something most people don't realize. Each of these small choices is training, a strengthening of the spiritual muscle you'll need when life really tests your limits. Kolbe didn't become a saint in those 7 days. He revealed himself as a saint. The sanctity had been built through thousands of small choices over decades. Choices no one saw, choices no one applauded, choices that seemed insignificant at the time. But when the ultimate test came, all those small choices added up to a force that could transform even death into victory. Because true power isn't in avoiding suffering, it's in finding meaning within it, in discovering that you are capable of so much more than you imagine when called to give your best. Kolbe wasn't canonized a saint simply because he died heroically. He was canonized because he showed how to live in a way that transforms even death into victory. And that same transformation is available to you, not through martyrdom, but through small daily choices. Choices of love instead of fear, of courage instead of comfort, of faith instead of cynicism. Maximilian Kolbe's 7-day fast was just the culmination of a lifetime of learning to choose love when it would have been easier to choose anything else. And what he discovered goes far beyond any specific religion. It's about the human capacity to find light in any darkness, to find hope in any despair, to find love even in the face of the most absolute hatred. Today, when you face your next difficulty, remember him. Remember that one man found a way to transform his own death into an act of love. And if he could do that, imagine what you can do with the challenges in your life. I'm not asking you to sacrifice yourself. I'm asking you to discover yourself, to find the strength that's hidden just beneath the surface, waiting for the right moment to emerge. Start today. When someone treats you poorly, instead of retaliating, ask, how can I respond with love? When you face a loss, instead of asking, why me, ask, what can I learn from this? When you feel like giving up, remember Kolbe on the 7th day, physically destroyed, but spiritually more powerful than ever, transforming even death into victory. Because in the end, the story of Maximilian Kolbe isn't about death, it's about life. About how to live so fully that not even dying can diminish the impact you have on the world. Remember the 2 crowns he saw as a child, the white crown of purity and the red crown of martyrdom. During those 7 days of fasting, Father Kolbe finally understood. They were never two separate crowns. They were one. Purity and martyrdom are the same thing. When you love completely, when you give yourself totally, when you stop protecting yourself and start protecting what truly matters. And that doesn't mean you need to die for someone. It means you need to live for something bigger than yourself. It means finding a cause, a purpose, a person for whom you would give everything. That's the real legacy of those 7 days, not the hunger, not the suffering, but the discovery that within each of us, there's something indestructible, something that can transform any darkness into light. And maybe, just maybe, the only thing separating you from that discovery is the courage to take a step forward when it would be easier to remain silent. Just like Father Kolbe did on that July day when he chose love over safety and changed the world forever. Because sometimes, when we lose absolutely everything, that's precisely when we find everything that truly matters. And we discover we were capable of so much more than we ever imagined. The next time you face something impossible, remember, you carry within you the same strength that transformed a death cell into a sanctuary. You just need enough courage to access it.